World Wildlife Fund was founded 50 years ago. Sorry for those of you in Europe, WWF was founded 50 years ago. We were created to protect biodiversity, ecosystem services. And we knew that we would have to also work on habitat. So we worked with governments to actually create protected areas, national parks, etc. What we discovered early on was that most biodiversity and ecosystem services don't exist in parks, don't exist in protected areas. So we had to start working with communities, with landowners, because that's where most biodiversity is on the planet. Over time, as we've worked in areas of human use on more sustainable resource use, we've begun to look at what the threats are, the drivers of deforestation, the drivers of species loss, the drivers of habitat destruction. And we've come to realize that there's one that's more important than all the others. If we don't get food production right, both where we produce it and how we produce it, in the next 40 years, as a conservation organization, we can turn out the lights and go home. That's how serious it is. What I'm going to talk about today are what the business as usual trends are with food production, what we're doing about food production, what some companies are doing, what you can do about it. But make no mistake, this is a serious issue. We have to address this issue, and this is why. In the next 40 years, we have to produce as much food as we have in the last 8,000. That's the challenge. It's going to become tougher every year. Whatever was sustainable per capita with 7 billion people will not be with 9 billion people, especially 9 billion people consuming twice as many resources per capita. We've got to do it on a single planet. We don't have another one. This is the one that we've got to use. And we can't get away from the basic math, that population times consumption has got to equal the planet. And you just heard it doesn't. Right now, we're living at 1.5 planets. We're living off the capital, not the interest. If we were farmers, we'd be eating our seed right now. We are literally eating the planet. And agriculture is the biggest threat to biodiversity and ecosystem losses. It's the main cause of deforestation and habitat loss on the planet. It uses twice as much water as all other human activities. It's the largest source of pollution on the planet. It uses more chemicals than any other human activity. It produces as many greenhouse gases as any other sector on the planet. And if we could measure them better, probably even more than any other industry on the planet. And agriculture is eroding its own base. 70% of farmers today lose more soil each year than they create. They're living off the principle, not the interest. In the last 150 years, we've lost half of the topsoil on the planet. That's not a very good place to start from when you have to double production in the next 40 years. So let's look at how we're using land on the planet today. About 33% is used to produce food. So 67% exists that isn't. What's the problem here? But if you took the deserts that are on the planet and the mountains and the rivers and the lakes and the cities and the infrastructure, and then take the land that we've put into protected areas, about 12%, we've got about 30% left. Well, 30% is still quite a bit of land, so what's the problem? At the current burn rate, and I use the term burn advisedly, We are going through land, we're adding more land to our agricultural base at the rate of 0.6% per year. Multiply 0.6 times 40. It's 24%. If we continue business as usual for the next 40 years, 6% of the land on the planet will not be farmed that could be. That's not very much room for biodiversity, when we know that most biodiversity, traditionally at least, has not been in protected areas. We've got to freeze the footprint of food, and we've got to start doing it now. WWF can't do everything. We can't work everywhere. We don't have enough resources. We have to focus. We've got to decide strategically where we're going to work, and we've chosen 35 places. After looking at those places and doing an analysis of the threats, we've decided that 15 commodities are the most significant threats across the board to those 35 places. And these are the 15 commodities. How are we going to work on those 15 commodities? Are we going to convince 6.9 billion consumers to buy products differently? Products that are often ingredients and lost in translation in the grocery stores? We'd have to be working in about 7,000 languages globally, at least 350 global languages. Kind of daunting. Are we going to work with 1.5 billion producers? Is that really the role of an environmental NGO, to do ag extension, to work with foresters, etc.? That seems a bit far-fetched, a bit of a challenge, a steep curve, if you will, for us. But we've also found that 300 to 500 companies control 70 to 80% of the trade of each of those 15 commodities. This seems like a better route, and what we did was then start doing research on which companies are involved in which of our commodities. And we begin to prepare lists and charts like this. And what you see, is what we saw, is that Cargill's here, Cargill's there, Cargill's everywhere. A lot of companies are in these matrices in multiple places. As we began to do the analysis, what we came to realize is that 100 companies control 25% of the trade of all 15 of the commodities we care about. 100 companies we can get our arms around. As we've started to work with these companies, we've actually come to realize that it's not 100 companies. In fact, it's only about 58 companies that control 25% of the trade of these 15 commodities. The reason 25% of trade is so important is that 25% of trade gives us 40 to 50% of producers, because producers will compete to sell into those better markets. And so we can leverage almost half of global production by working with those 100 companies. The ones in green are the ones that we've signed agreements to work with. The ones in yellow are the ones that we're negotiating with now. This is about 3.5 years, 4 years of work. By 2050, 9 billion people are going to consume twice as much food per capita as they do today. So, how do we produce this food? What we've come to think is that there's no silver bullet. There are multiple strategies. Everybody can do something. No institution, no individual can do everything. But there are plenty of opportunities. We think there are about 9 food wedges that include waste, genetics, technology, clicker, better practices, degraded land, property rights, over and under consumption, carbon, and urban agriculture. I want to just talk about a few of these to explain why they're so important. Let's start with waste. Right now, we waste 1 out of every 3 calories produced. We do it differently in developed countries than we do in developing countries, but the average is about the same. Put another way, if we eliminated waste today in the food chain, we could reduce the amount of new food we need to produce before 2050 by half. That's how significant waste is. Waste in developing countries looks like this. It's post-harvest losses, it's lack of infrastructure, it's lack of storage, etc. In developed countries, it looks like this. It's post-consumer, post-restaurant, post-household. It's the things you throw away out of your refrigerator because you don't have a little handheld device for less than $100 that could tell you whether the food is still good or not, whether the Chinese takeout is still good, the soup that you made 2 weeks ago is still good or not. We also tend to think that sell by equals throw away by. Huge amount of waste. We need to have consistent labeling on products so that we can reduce waste. I come from the Midwest, from a state called Missouri. We had a saying there that goes something like this: dance with the one that brung you. Over the last 8,000 years, the reason we're in a room here in a city is because of genetics. It's because of plant breeding. It's because of creating surpluses that allowed for urban development. Without plant breeding, without selecting traits, without selecting for productivity, we'd still be hunting and gathering. Genetics got us here. We can't take it off the table. But genetics doesn't mean GMOs, and we got to be clear about that. We've got to be able to select for traits and breed them. That's absolutely what's going to get us to 2050 as well. This is one of the major food wedges. Right now, we depend on less than 10 crops for about 75 to 80% of the calories we consume on the planet. Only 2 of those will double in production by 2050 without simply increasing the amount of land planted. So we've got to look at genetics to increase productivity, to increase drought tolerance in an era of climate change, to improve disease resistance, and to increase the nutrients in the different foods. We also need to shift our thinking from temperate crops. Why do we spend so much money torturing corn and soybeans to figure out how to grow them in the tropics? Why don't we focus on tropical crops like these? Bananas produce, in Costa Rica, 20 times more calories per hectare than corn in Iowa. Why is all the money being spent on corn? Why don't we work on bananas or cassava or palm oil or other crops that are important? NEPAD, Mars, and WWF recently launched an initiative at the Clinton Global Initiative to map the genomes of the 25 to 30 most important crops, food crops in Africa. Why? Because we need to focus on the crops in the areas where populations are going to increase the most and where consumption is going to increase the most. In Africa, that's 25 or 30 crops. Let's map the genomes, put it in the public domain, forget about the intellectual property, and let plant breeders have access to all this information so they can focus on the real issue, how to get better planting materials to farmers. It's odd that an environmental group, a candy company, and a political organization had to come to this conclusion rather than the major universities and ag research centers. Why does Mars care about genetics? Because they have found in the plantations that they buy cocoa from that 20% of the trees produce 80% of the crop. And that if you can provide water to those trees during the dry season for 2 or 3 months, you can double production, or rather you can reduce the losses, which are normally about half. What that means is that by focusing on those 20% of the trees, selecting for those productivity and drought resistance traits, they can actually produce 3 to 4 times as much on less than half the land. Mars mapped the genome of the cocoa plant, and they put it in the public domain so every plant breeder would have access to it, because they're not an IP company. They're not a bunch of lawyers trying to protect their intellectual property. They're trying to get planting materials to farmers, and they think the best way to do that is to put the material out in the public domain. So they have focused on increasing productivity to take pressure off of land to increase farmers' incomes. They've made another commitment, which is kind of startling. They won't buy certified poverty. Right now, no certification program of any kind on the planet certifies productivity. And yet productivity is one of the things that we need to begin to focus on. So Mars is saying they won't buy cocoa from farmers if they can only produce 300 or 400 kilos of cocoa per hectare, because a farm family can't make a living on that. If they're going to have farmers in the future, then they need 1,000 or 1,200 kilos so the kids can go to school, so they can actually enjoy a better life. So they see farming as not just the place you end up because you have no other opportunities, but a place you end up out of choice. Today's technology. Agriculture uses about 70% of the water. That's more, than twice as much as everything else. We know that water is scarce already. With climate change, water availability is going to be more variable, and it's going to become more extreme in terms of scarcity. Right now, today, it takes 1 liter of water on average globally to produce 1 calorie of food. We got to get better. Can we use half a liter to produce 2 calories? This is the kind of thinking that we need to do. So what's the best technology to do this? Is it flood? Is it furrow? Is it center pivot? Is it drip? The answer is it depends. It depends on what crop you're growing. It depends on where you're growing. It depends on local conditions. There's no easy answer to this, but we do know that every farmer should be able to produce twice as much using whatever technology they're already using if they were more efficient. In fact, what we found is that better practices globally, those farmers that are the most productive are 100 times more productive than those that are least productive. Within a given country, a province, a state, the best producers are 10 times better. Whether it's Iowa, whether it's the Cerrado in Brazil, etc., they're 10 times better than their counterparts. In the age of IT, we need to get better practices spread more quickly. It takes about 10 years today to get better practices spread around the globe. We need to do it in 2 or 3. The planet actually depends on it. So which gives us more food over the long term? Recognizing the best producers and certifying them, or moving the bottom, moving the rest? Most environmental groups care about the impacts of production. That's why they get involved in certification programs. The bottom 25% of producers produce 50 to 75% of the impacts we care about. Certification programs move the top. We've got to start moving the bottom so we can shift the whole performance curve. It means we've got to work with governments. We've got to work on policies. We've got to get government policies to be aligned with certification strategies so that we can shift the whole performance curve. IKEA and WWF work together in partnership around cotton. Why does IKEA care about cotton? Because they're the second largest buyer of cotton in the world. Why does World Wildlife Fund care about cotton? Because it uses more pesticides than any other commodity on the planet. It also uses a lot of water in areas that are water scarce. We started by working with 450 farmers. Today we're at about 70,000. The impacts have been a 50% reduction of pesticide use and water use amongst those 60,000 growers, 70,000 growers, and an increase in income of about 40%. Now, this source of cotton is 25% of IKEA's total purchase at this point, and within 3 to 4 years, they think that 100% of their cotton will be certified and will be produced with fewer pesticides and less water. We also work with Unilever, and Unilever has made similar kinds of gains through their supply chain management. One of their products is toothpaste. And for those of you who don't know it, toothpaste is mostly starch. That's the basic material in it. And starch used to be purchased by Unilever globally. It came from global chemical companies. Today they buy starch locally that's produced by farmers from things like cassava, this particular crop. By making that one decision to change the way they source, they support the full-time equivalent of 35,000 farmers in Indonesia alone. They only have 3,000 employees themselves. But they're not doing this just in Indonesia. In India, they're supporting gherkin or cucumber projects. They've doubled production and reduced pesticide use by 78%. This is what companies are beginning to do. But Unilever's commitment is far more than just these two commodities. By 2020, more than 3,000 raw materials that they source will be certified as sustainable. That's their commitment. They're on record. They don't have a clue how they're going to get there. But that's where we all come in to help them, because it takes vision and it takes leadership to plant the flag further than you can actually see the journey. And that's what they've done. What we all have to do on a finite planet is more with less. 100 companies can move 50% of production. Their 25% of demand will actually achieve that. The question is, what can you do? Can you cut waste? Can you become a conscious consumer? Can you change your lifestyle? Think about it. Thank you very much.